So, for today's video, we're going to talk about the second release, Damage. So, after the success of the first release, the Goo Patrol Vehicle Derrick Split 7-inch, which I'll talk about in a different video you'll find somewhere on here on the channel, it came to the decision of what to do for the next release, and I had lots of ideas. First thing that I thought of doing was another Split 7-inch, and the idea was to perhaps have another band local to me in Boston in Lincolnshire at the time, with a band out of town, because that had worked quite well with the Vehicle Derrick Goo Patrol. So my original plan was to do this band called Big Chief Fail, which was Jim and his brother Christian doing kind of a big black kind of thing with a drum machine. On the other side, the band who I thought would be ideally suited for them was the band of a guy called Michael, who over in Northern Ireland, who I was tape trading with at the time, and he just sent me. And that band was Therapy. And luckily for them and for me, at the time, because I hadn't got a clue what I was doing with the label at this time, I changed my mind. So I didn't release the very first record by Therapy, which is probably just as well, because yeah, it wouldn't have probably been the best thing for me to do at that time, because I remember I was a 17-year-old, 18-year-old kid who really didn't know what he was doing but thought he did. So anyway, so I went through lots of other ideas. I think I toyed with the idea of Mad at the Sun from Exeter, because I was in touch with David and Ed and really liked their demo, but they were kind of, I think, on the cusp of fizzling out and moving over into what would become Wordbug a little bit later on. So then there was another guy I used to tape trade with called Mark, who lived in Reading. We used to trade backwards and forwards, as you did at the time. That's how you got to hear a lot of new music. And Mark told me about this band close to him called Damage, who'd done this cracking demo, and this demo was called Life is Cheap. When he sent it to me, I went, wow, this is brilliant. And I think a lot of the reason why it sounded so great is they'd recorded this demo with Martin Nichols at the White House studio in Weston-super-Mare. Now, if you know anything about UK punk from the 90s and into the 2000s, the White House studio in Weston-super-Mare was where loads and loads of bands went, because Martin was just wonderful with producing UK hardcore bands. The last Heresy was recorded there. Ripcord is how it came about. Can't Decide recorded there. Shutdown, Annalise, Decadence Within, loads of bands. It was the go-to place. And Martin had obviously done the Damage because they were based in Reading. They'd gone across to Weston-super-Mare and they recorded 4 songs on this Life is Cheap demo. And it was fantastic. I sent it through to a few other people around saying, what do you think of this? This is brilliant. And everyone came back saying, wow, this band's brilliant. This is great stuff. This is, you know, this is sort of like Husker Du meets Black Flag, and it's, you know, but it's powerful, and it just sounds really tight and together. So I thought, right, this would make a cracking 7-inch single. So anyway, through Mark, I think I managed to get hold of the singer Nick. They were a 5-piece band called Nick, Tom and Hamish, which, you know, having 3 Nicks in the band out of 5, you know, you could just shout Nick and you'd have 3 heads turned around to you when you're on tour, I seem to remember. So they were not that keen about doing the demo. I think they had some new songs and they were more excited about the new songs. They said, we want to record some new songs for a 7-inch. Now, this was all happening in like the spring, probably April, May time, so it was very soon after the Split 7-inch had come out. And we were already planning a tour for Goo Patrol and Vehicle Derrick in the summer, around July, August time. And the idea was, well, if we do a 7-inch by you could come on the tour too, and we'll have 3 bands on tour and we'll swap all around. But obviously that meant that we had to get a wiggle on with getting the release out. So the idea is that they managed to get, I don't think Martin Nichols for whatever reason was available, or they didn't want to go back to Weston-super-Mare for reasons best known to themselves. So because they were predominantly based in Reading and London, they went for a London studio, and they booked into this studio called Rock Solid Studios. And I think I could be wrong, but Les from the Bay City Rollers had something to do with this studio. Whether he owned it or was the manager, I don't know. But and they had an engineer guy called Bill Sinclair. Now, from what I can tell, from when they went in to record, he was basically stoned the complete time. So the band themselves ended up pretty much doing the mix of those songs. Now, this is where my naivety kicked in, because unfortunately, I didn't actually hear the recording before it went to the plant, because we were on such a tight timescale. I remember I was living in rural Lincolnshire, didn't drive, 17, doing my A-levels at the time. So the band literally mixed it and went round to the broker down in Peckham, Indie Pressing Services, who we used to press, so that it could go out on the next shipment to Hungary, where they used to get the records pressed. And I'll mention in another video why there were never any test pressings done, because that's a whole nother story. It was a very steep learning curve, and I soon learned never ever ever let a band record something, don't listen to it and get it pressed. You need to hear it before it goes to the pressing plant, and this was the prime thing, because the first I actually heard the record was when it came back, and the production was awful. It was really bad, and it was like night and day between that and their demo. The songs were good, the songs were there, you could hear underneath this horrific production and mix, there were some good songs there, but it just didn't work, it was, and I remember feeling quite deflated at the time, because it was now pressed, but not only was it pressed, it was pressed on 12-inch, because when they got to the studio, because both sides were about 9 minutes long, because they'd done 5 songs, it wouldn't fit on a 7-inch single. So we had to, at the very last minute, change it to a 12-inch single. In hindsight, I really, really, really wish we'd either just released the demo as a 7-inch, or we'd have put the 7-inch on the B side or the A side and made it a 9-track album. A 5-track 12-inch single was just really hard to sell of an unknown band. And I guess if I look back on it now, my heart really wasn't in it, because I knew it wasn't as good as it should have been. But we got the records back for the tour. The band went on tour. We played some shows with Goo Patrol and Vehicle Derek round. We swapped it over. Unfortunately, I do remember the 2 nights that Damaged headline were the 2 worst attended gigs of the entire tour as well. Just how it happened, we just did it by potluck. There was nothing planned or sinister on that at all. And it got very, very unsurprisingly mixed reviews. And then, of course, there was the artwork. Not a fan. It was a really hard sleeve for them to print, so lots of them had blotches in the corner because there was so much solid black on it. It was typeset at the pressing plant, because obviously I wasn't there, so the postcode says, instead of 5BD, says SBD, silent but deadly, which is quite ironic. And if we open this up, it had a couple of photocopied lyric sheets in there, and guess what side that is. And then on the B side, Boss Tuneage is actually spelt wrong, because that was typeset at the studio and he couldn't spell Boss Tuneage. So all in all, it's a disappointment, and after the elation of doing the first single, it could have been so much better, and I think that's where I get frustrated. Even now, 32 years on, I'm frustrated at that release, which is a good thing, because if I hadn't given a crap, then there was no point me running a record label, I guess. Looking back in hindsight as well now, the band themselves, whilst they were really nice guys, they were quite naive in the bands that they knew. They weren't really involved in the punk scene at the time. They kind of knew Black Flag, Husker Du, Fugazi, and that was it. I remember in Lincoln we played this nightclub called Vienna's. They had video screens, and they had this German sort of fanzine, Tribal Area, that's what it was called, Tribal Area, playing. And I remember there was like an interview and pictures of the Lemonheads, for example. And I remember one of them turning around to me and saying, who's this band? And I said, oh, it's the Lemonheads. And they said, oh, are they popular? So yeah, so they were kind of not really in the scene at all at the time, didn't know any of the UK bands or anything like that. So yeah, so it was a bit of a square peg round hole situation, but you know, it is what it is. It was a hard sell, I'll be honest. Not surprisingly, the reviews weren't great. Yeah, the band kind of fizzled out pretty much, I think, after that tour. I think they realised a few days on the road they didn't want to do it anymore. As to what they went on to do, the only person that I know from the band that went on to do another band was Hamish, the bass player, who ended up about 12 months later in an indie pop band called Revolver, who were kind of successful and got quite big. I remember them being on like the chart show on Channel 4 and things like that. So yeah, so he went and did that, but then I think they fizzled out too. But yeah, so yeah, it was a big learning curve, big learning curve, and it basically taught me that, you know, if you're putting these records out, you need, whilst it is admirable to give the bands as much artistic freedom as you want, and that's always been my ethos. I've always wanted bands to, you know, put out what they're happy with. You need to have some quality control and your input as well sometimes, and this was the prime example of it. So that's it for this video, and I'll speak to you on the next one. Thanks for watching.